Well, hello all. Hello out there in Zoom land. We're doing Crafting with Kimberly today. We have a wonderful live classroom over here out of sight. You can't see them, but they're here. Yay! And on the camera here. So what we're doing today is a sunflower watercolor. So it's just kind of Van Gogh-y, kind of just, you know, gentle colors. It's not meant to look exactly like a sunflower, because as you can tell, here's a real sunflower. Colors are a little off, but there's so many different varieties of sunflowers. So it's whatever you want it to be. As I try to always do, most of my supplies are from the Dollar Tree. I like to do, you know, really inexpensive things that you can use. This is a really cool box. It has some weird, can I grab yours real fast because I don't want to take my picture up. Thank you. It has just a little saying in there, tropical state of mind, but I liked it because it had these two little beads here. So Dollar Tree has these almost every season. They come up with some kind of box with something in it. If you want to do a twofer, keep that, turn it around, and then you can attach your sunflower to the back of it. And then you've got a twofer sign if you really like whatever I had two different sayings. So if you really liked what your saying was, well, then you can put it on the other side and you get a twofer. So that's the box. And then I stuck mine inside. I also added cute little raffia twine cord bow. This is a really easy thing to do with the bows. The way I did it, I just took my twine, little roll of twine, took my twine, I started up here and I just went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, brought it right back up. Any number of loops will do, doesn't matter. And then I cut it like that. So then you'll have that. I like to take the little ends that where you've cut it, kind of put those one on each side, like put them at the bottom for now. Cut another piece of twine. This is what's going to hold it all together. Probably about, I would say, 4 inches. Doesn't really matter. And what we'll do with our tails hanging down, take it and pinch it, just pinch it right in the middle. If you want to try to catch those, you can, but I like extra things hanging down. So those two are just going to hang down for me. And then you're just going to wrap this around. I did it like twice and then tie it in the middle. Not hard. Not anything fancy. If you want that to show, I kind of like the way the knot looks right there. So if you want that to show, you can have that and you can hang those two ends down like that and then have the little knot with the ends in the middle. If you don't like that, snip off your ends, glue it to the back. But that's just going to be a cute little decoration to put up at the top, just something added. So today we're doing watercolors. Watercolors are very different than acrylics. Acrylics have plastic in it. That's acrylic. It has pieces of plastic in it, and that's why acrylics dry extremely quickly. I work mainly in acrylics. I like acrylics. I don't work a lot in watercolors. I'm just kind of starting to play with the watercolors. The nice thing about watercolors is kind of think more abstractly when you're doing it. Yes, I've seen some really, really close picture-like items coming out of acrylic paintings, watercolor paintings. But on the whole, most of what I've seen coming from acrylics are more loose pictures, more abstracty type of pictures. You know, not as detailed as acrylics. So that's the nice thing about watercolor is, you know, really kind of think abstractly. You're not going to try to paint an actual portrait of anybody. You're going to just kind of be more loose. There's two ways to do a watercolor picture. There is a method wet on wet, where you actually get your paper all wet, and then you're dipping your brush into the water as well and adding the paint that way. You don't have a lot of leeway with wet on wet. That's great if you really want to do just blobs and abstract colors, because with watercolor paint, the first word is water. So wherever there's water, that's where that paint wants to go. I like to paint more the dry method, where I'm not getting a big area wet. I'm kind of just dipping my brush into the water and then painting that way, because anything that's wet, like if you have a very large background that you'd like to paint, say you're doing a picture about this size, everybody else is doing something smaller, but say you're doing something this big. And I know for 100% that I want to make this entire area sky and clouds. Well, what I could do is I could get this area wet here, get this area wet here, get this area wet here, then dip my paint into the blue, and then just start to kind of touch it to the areas. And wherever there's water, your paint will just bloom out from it. It'll expand out. So that's the biggest thing to remember. Wherever there's water, that paint's going to go to it. So when we're painting our picture, we have to be really mindful of that. And that's why we're not going to do the wet on wet, because we don't have a lot of time in between. So what we want to do is paint each section kind of right away. If you wanted to do it the wet on wet, do your whole blue area, go off, have a cup of coffee, come back when it's dry, then you can go to your next section. Or if you were going to do wet on wet, you have to make sure that if you're getting it wet down here, well, then move up here to work, move to different sections. So you just truly have to remember, wherever there's a wet area, your paint is instantly going to want to attach and grab and go with it. So as I said, today, we're really going to do mainly the dry way. You all have a pencil. If you want to draw the thing first, I would say draw very lightly, draw enough where you can see it. I don't mind the lines of a watercolor showing through. I don't mind that at all, because to me that's like shading and highlights, and it helps me know where I might want to go. Like I did here, I kind of went back over it and I made it a little darker. So the lines didn't bother me. If you want to just free form, go ahead and free form. I'm going to show how to do like this 3 little picture, but if you want to do just one big one, go ahead and do that. If you want to do a 1 and a leaf, whatever you want to paint, go ahead. But I'm going to go off of this one and teach that, but feel free to do whatever you want to do with yours. So if we are going to, we're going to do this. The way I did it is I had basically one focal flower, one in the background. So that's why it was overlapping. And then kind of another focal one over on this way. You know, to me, my eye goes to the center first, but that was just kind of offset. You can loop them all together whatever you want to do. So with that, what I did is I'm going to try to do it much bigger so you can see. What I did is I said, all right, I kind of want one there. So I'm going to just gently, like an ovally circle. You know, flowers aren't perfect. They're not perfect circles if you really look at it. So it doesn't really matter if it's a little off. So I'm going to do a little circle there. I'm thinking I want another one in that little corner. So I'm going to, just to give myself an idea of where I want it to go, I'm going to do another circle here. I think I'm going to make this one be a little bit bigger. So I'm going to just put a little circle in the other corner. For now, I'm going to still do, even though this one is half hidden, I'm still going to do an oval over here. So I kind of want that one over this way. So I'm just going to lightly draw an oval. And the nice thing with watercolor paper is, yes, you can erase. So if you make a mistake, feel free to erase it. It's not going to hurt your paper at all. So this just gives me my idea of where I kind of want to put my flowers. I'm not going to worry about the leaves because I did the leaves at the end. So I'm not going to really worry about that. I also did my background color last. Some people like to do their background color first. I wanted it last because I truly, when I was painting this, I wasn't sure what I really wanted. I didn't want my blue to mix in with my yellow at all. So I actually really waited much later to put my blue in. The other thing I want to say too is with the watercolor paints, I gave everybody here a palette and put the tiniest little drop of paint. When you're working with acrylics, you need a lot of paint and you usually go through a lot of paint. The amazing thing with watercolor is a little dab will do ya. It will go. So I only put about that much on the palette. I'm telling you, even after painting this one, you can probably go home and paint 4 or 5 more pictures with this. The other nice thing is once it dries, I didn't bring my other palette up. Once it dries, all you need to do is reactivate it with water. Dip your brush in water, you can start painting with that paint again. So for people in class, you're going to be able to take this palette home with you. So, you know, say next month you want to paint, it'll be dry, just get water and start painting. It's amazing how, so you can see the little dots that I did. So it is amazing where a little bitty bit will get you. I liked this palette because it had a lot of spots to go into. That's really great for when you want to blend the items. For these colors, I'm using a yellow ochre. I liked the deeper color yellow. You could use a bright yellow, but I'm using a yellow ochre. For the blue sky in this particular kit, it was called Prussian blue. So tiny, I can't read it. Prussian blue. The orange that I did for just a little outlining there, that was called vermilion. And the green that I chose was a sea green. So pretty much any colors will do. I happen to get this set, which I have really liked. It's called Royal Langnickel Artist Paint from Five Below. So it was $5. It came in a kit with, you know, a whole bunch of colors. Any watercolor will do. You do not, when you're first starting out, you do not need to spend, you know, $14 a tube for watercolor. Get the really cheap stuff, even get the kind that are like the old kids paints. You'll see those in a lot of places that just have like the circles with a little bit of watercolor. Get those, it's fine, it'll work. If you really wanted to make your own watercolor, somewhat make your own, you can water down acrylic paint, but we were talking about it before class. When you water down, acrylic paint has plastic in it. So it's going to dry, it's going to stay. You can't really erase it. You can't really, it dries quickly. So even if you water it down, it's still going to be acrylic paint, whereas watercolor will never dry. So if you are doing a watercolor painting, don't do it in the rain because you're going to have a new abstract. Don't leave it outside. And don't put it anywhere in your house where you're going to spray water or get water on it, because it will suddenly turn into a really great abstract painting. So there are fixatives that you can use. I've never used it, so we're not going to go into those in here because I have never. There's special sprays that you can spray on it to fix your watercolor to never do that, but you all can look those up online. Here we're just being basic today. A good thing to remember is start out light with your water. Don't put a ton of water because, as I said, wherever you have water, it's gonna go. If you want to draw your petals, you can. If you just want to freeform them, you can. And, I'll draw one here. A petal is basically kind of like a surfboard. Picture a pointy surfboard. So it's a little wide here. It goes up, it comes down, and then you got a petal. So it's just kind of out and then down. So it really, and petals aren't perfectly aligned. You can make it more rounded on top. You can make them more pointy on top. There's a lot of different types of sunflowers out there. I'm just this was the design that I went with. So if you want to draw your leaves, go ahead. To make them interesting, think some in the front, some in the back. So I just put 2 petals right here to make it interesting. I'm going to draw another little petal that's going to sit in the back. But again, if you want to just freehand and just not worry about where they go to, do that. But I'm going to draw them just so people can see. I don't know if you could really see that there. So so you start with your one flower that you want to do, and then just draw. And if you have spaces in between them, that gives more interest. You don't want to be perfectly aligned, kind of like a coloring book. You don't want the perfect outline. The more wonky, in a sense, that you make them, I think the more interest your picture is going to have. So like, I'm just going to draw. I kind of still like the idea of this one being underneath the other one. So as you can see, I'm just drawing right on top of that one. I'll worry about that one later. I'm going to move my painting, turn your work, instead of trying to get, I don't know why we think when we start drawing on something, we have to have it in that position. Move your paper around. It makes it much easier to keep it at an angle that you want. So I'm going to kind of just move my paper around. I'm drawing. If you go off your paper, that gives visual interest as well. Nothing says everything has to be right in the middle of it. Another really neat technique to do is take painter's tape, and on the paper that you're using, put a strip, do an outline all around your paper of painter's tape. When you're painting, paint onto the painter's tape. So pretend like the painter's tape isn't there and use it. Then when you pull your painter's tape away, you have a beautiful border around your picture automatically, and your petals or whatever it is you're drawing, they're going off the page. So it might be hard to draw like, oh, I only want to draw half a petal. That's kind of hard. So if you're drawing it where you're off and then you remove your tape, you've instantly got your really neat interest. So that's another neat tip. So like this one, I'm way up at the top with this. So this is going to be my idea. Like I was telling you, I'm going to pretend that I can keep drawing. So I'm going to go up, up. I would go up to here. I would point my petal up here and then be coming down. So this particular one is still going off. Like I said, I like to do them behind so they're very full. So with this one, I'm going completely in and out. I'm not worrying about if they're actually touching. I'm not worrying about, you know, the exact shape. If you want, oh, if I can see one. Sometimes I've seen the sunflowers where the petals are folding up at the end. That's kind of a little hard to draw. So I'm just pretending this is perfectly out and flat, but you would just kind of draw a little half circle. If you wanted some folding upwards, you could draw a little bit of a half circle up here, but then imagine it has to kind of go down. And you'd paint it in. It's easier once you have the paint. It's hard to draw it that way, but once you paint. For a class, we have actual sunflowers sitting on our tables. If you don't have sunflowers or it's the middle of winter and you want to paint one, just copy a picture, print it out. That gives you some visual aids that way. So this one, I am going to erase the lines here because that folded over. So I'm not going to color that in anymore. I'm not going to color that one in anymore because I've got 2 leaves. So then this one, I'm still going to pretend that I'm coming up like I normally would because it's overlapping. So like there's a little space in there that would be yellow because that picture, it's still going around in a circle. You're not going to see any of the petals that are up here because it's behind the flower. But make them thicker, make some thin. You know, you want it to be interesting. Move your, see, I'm not, you know, if you can see that at all, I can't tell if it's coming up. But I'm not being very careful with how I'm drawing these. And once you start painting, you're going to go over the lines anyway. So it's okay. So this is just, you know, don't draw hard. Always keep a very light touch to give yourself some kind of idea of where you want to paint. And like I said, you also can do it without drawing it. So I've got some behind. I've got my big one over here. Now I'm going to come over and do this one. And I'm just kind of letting them overlap. This one is overlapping that one. If you're drawing it and then you want to erase some of the lines where it overlapped afterwards, that's fine. But again, remember, this drawing that we're doing is a very light touch, and it's just to give the idea of where we're going with our paint, just to help you know. You could draw your leaves in now if you really wanted to. I like to do the sunflowers first and then kind of see, well, did I make the sunflower bigger than what I thought I did? Did I make it smaller than I thought I did? Then I can put my leaves in afterwards, or you don't even need leaves. So you can see It's really not hard drawing these leaves. You're just, I mean, the petals, you're just drawing basic shapes. So I've got a pretty basic drawing here. So I roughly did this. So petals kind of coming and going. And as I said, when you're actually going to be painting, you might follow your lines, you might not. That's why it's very important to do the lines lightly. Your pencil can also be a great tool in regards to giving shadow. I went in here with these little lines. I went darker with my watercolor. Watercolor is basically done in layers. So you put a light layer down, and then if you want shadow, you go over that little area again, and that gives the color a little bit darker. So that's how you kind of get your shadows. You don't need to have multiple colors. You can just keep going over it in an area, and that's going to make it darker and darker and darker and darker. So that's a great way to give your interest of your leaves too. If you want a sunflower, traditionally has like all these little circles where the seeds are in the center of the sunflower. So if you really wanted to be fancy, I didn't do that in the one over there, but I'm going to show you how we can do it here. And with this one, I'm actually with these little, I'm just putting all these tiny, tiny little circles around inside. And I'm doing it hard. I'm doing it with the pencil hard because I want those to show. I'm going to save myself time and trouble. I don't want to have to take my watercolor and do these big circles and have to try to get the definition. I'm going to let my pencil be my definition. So with this one, I'm just going to go crazy with all these tiny little circles. They're really little points. If you look at an actual sunflower, they're little points. And the points, if you pull it out, is where you're getting your sunflower seeds. I got these from my mom and dad's garden, and it was really fun to watch the birds because this is the end of the season for sunflowers. So it was really fun to watch the birds landing on the stems, bending down and plucking the seeds right out. In my yard, I can't grow anything. I do not have a green thumb at all. If you want a plant killed, I am your person. Send it to me. I'll take care of it for you. So we bought some sunflower seeds and gave them to our neighbor, and they so kindly planted them for me. So I got to enjoy sunflowers, and it was really fun to watch the squirrels nipping the tops of the sunflowers off and then carrying them in their hands and chewing the seeds out. Really cute. Really, really cute. So I really enjoyed that. So with this one, you can see on that one, I just kind of went through and did a whole bunch of circles. So I would say, again, don't stress too much about the whole thing. Give yourself just a basic outline. I did these circles myself here just so you can see what that's going to look like. If you don't want to take the time to do it, you don't have to. Take as much time as you need. Like I said, your paint's going to dry out, so that's okay. Feel free to just do one flower and then not worry about it. Now on the table, I have, there's 2 jars of water, basically. A great rule of thumb is have water to rinse your brush and clean water to be able to get your water in. What I like to do, I like to take my brush and I like to dip it into my clean water. I'm going to pick a part of my palette here that does not have any paint in it. And I'm just gonna start dabbing some clean water on there. So I'm just gonna get myself another area. And if you don't have a palette, wax paper is great to use too. So just get a big piece of wax paper. But I'm just gonna put some water there. So I've got like a big dot of water in one of my empty spaces. I'm gonna start with the yellow, my yellow ochre. My paintbrush is wet, so I'm gonna just dip it a little bit into my paint. Now my paint has been sitting out here for a little bit and it's dried. So you can see I'm just kind of getting a little bit on there, and I'm gonna bring it over to this area that I just did. So now I've got a big, hard to see, but I've got a big dollop of yellow here, because that means I'm not really wasting the paint that's up here. I'm just dealing with this one. So the more, with a palette, you can't have too many, they have some huge ones that have tons of little holes. You can't have too many. It's great. So after you've, I'm gonna have to try to hold this so we can see. I'm gonna start, and I'm just gonna follow one of my outlines. I'm just gonna come up here and start painting. We talked about the wet on wet. If I had made this all wet, wherever I put this paint to start with, it would completely have gone on all the areas. And I'm holding this upright. So you can see it's not dripping because I didn't put that much water and that much paint. You can see I have a very pale yellow start. Watercolor is really done in layers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue around my flower here, and I am just going to paint into the yellow. I'm just going to put a very light coat just to give myself color. I'm also bringing the brush down and then going to my neck. You can see how a little bit of color and a little bit of paint goes a long way. I just painted 3 flowers here with the same paint. As you can see, I'm getting just a little bit of color on there. This is how we're going to get depth. Yeah. Yes.
If you're using the other paint or just the paint,
Like acrylic with water.
acrylic, and you're doing inside the sunblock, can you do the same thing maybe with the permanent pens
To give shadow.
for the inside?
Yes. The question was, if you were actually, you can do that for either. The question was, could you use like permanent pens to do the little dots or even do shadows on the outside? And the answer is definitely yes. Definitely with a permanent marker, you would want to wait till it was really dry, because a permanent marker will not go on a wet surface. It'll make maybe one dot and then just stop. So at the very end, when it was all dry, if you wanted to make dots, you could do that. You can mix watercolor and acrylics as well. We also have the question before of there are watercolor pencils. I have found watercolor pencils are great for shading and giving added details and depth. If you try to quote unquote paint with a watercolor pencil, you're really not going to achieve the same effect that we're getting now. If I had a watercolor pencil and I drew a line and then I took water and put water up to it, the color will spread a little bit, but not a lot. So I have truly found I like the watercolor pencils mainly for drawing So like you could have taken a yellow watercolor pencil and drawn your flower, brown to do the middle. You could have done that, and that would give you extra depth. And you can also kind of see my palette. You all saw the blob that I had. I still have a huge blob on here, and I've painted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I've painted 8 flower petals already, and I still have almost the same size blob of paint that I had. So you can really see how far watercolor paints go, which is nice. And if you let it completely dry on your palette, anytime you come back, you just get your brush wet, dip into it. So there's also a technique called dry brushing, which is what I kind of did. My one petal here was dry already. I dipped my paintbrush right into the paint. My brush was drying out because I hadn't gotten it wet again. So basically it was a dry brush, quote unquote. That's what dry brushing is. You're not getting your brush wet. You're going directly into the watercolor paint, and it's not as watered down. Like I had to put like 6 drops of water in and then just take a little dab of the paint. If I go in directly in my paint, you can see how dark that line is. So that's kind of how you outline in shade. So I'm going to just kind of keep going over this little area a bit, bring it down a little bit. So you can see how that shaded the leaf. That gave it a little more interest. And if I don't like that, I go into my water and say, no, I don't really like that. All right, I'm just going to take it, and you can see how I'm almost erasing it and pulling all of that color away. It's making it a little darker there. But if I kept doing that, or if I took a wet paper towel and tapped it on there, it would do the same thing. So experiment with, do you like, if you paint dry, you're going to get much more vibrant colors, but it's easier to paint a thin layer first of a very pale color and then go over in the dark areas. And what you also want to do is you want to think of your light source. There's always a shadow, there's always sun. So when you're thinking about putting some shadows in there, you have to pick a spot and say, where's my sun coming from? Is my sun coming from, this right-hand side and shining down? That means everything on the right-hand side of the paper is going to be lighter. Everything on the left-hand side is going to be a little darker because it's not getting as much light, or vice versa. So if you don't care and you just want abstract and you just want to outline it all the way around, do that too. I think the best words I ever heard in regards to crafting was Bob Ross, happy little accidents. There are no accidents in painting. They're just, happy new experiences of what we're going to have. And I've always said there's no mistakes in crafting. You're just going to suddenly go in a different direction than what you thought. Sometimes your paper speaks to you. You want it to do one thing and it says, nope, I'm going to do something else. Sometimes you have to go with it. But you can see as you go through, you can experiment a little bit with putting more paint on your brush, on a less wet brush. Try it with a drier brush, doing your highlights. Any other questions as we're going around here? I think that I know a lot of people many people who craft and who start to paint, they try watercolors once and they say, I hate it. I'm never going to touch this again. It was way too hard. What I found with watercolors, you really have to practice it. And you have to literally go with the flow with where your brush strokes take you. And remember, it's a much more fluid way of painting, again, literally. Enjoy the abstract part of it. Let the color flow to where you want it to go. You know, experiment a little bit also, you know, take just your water and with just plain water, paint one of the leaves. And then take your brush, put it in the paint so it's a dry brush, put in the paint and see how the water and the paint interact and how it flows together. You're gonna get a completely different look like that. If you really make a mistake and you really don't like where your paint ended up or where it went, dip a piece of paper towel into clean water and dab. You don't want to ever rub watercolor paper. Watercolor paper is extremely porous. It's meant to be porous, so it basically sucks up your paint. Keeps it on, you know, brings it into its surface, brings it in there. But you can somewhat erase. And that's why I say it's nice to do a light layer to start with, because then if you feel you have made a mistake or it's gone in a direction you really don't like, it's a lot easier to fix if it's lighter than if it's darker. If you're painting along and you paint in a spot that you thought was a petal, but it was part of your background showing through, well, you can either dab it out with a wet paper towel, or you can turn it into another petal. So if everybody can look up, I think I have that upside down. This is my top one. I just gently, lightly did a light color all over everything, just to give it some basic color. Now I'm going to kind of, and believe it or not, I mean, it's pretty much dry already because we're outside, so it dries pretty quick. So depending on the humidity, how dry your house is, if you're out, you know, windy, not windy, watercolor dries pretty quick as long as you're not saturating your paper. So now I'm going to go through and I'm just going to say, all right, I want to kind of outline where I have my pencil marks. I just want to outline in a darker color, and I can do that shade wise. And right now I'm just working in with the yellow. For everybody, I gave you some yellow. I gave you some, like I said, basically the orange for adding highlights as well. I like orange and yellow together. But again, you can see I'm not even going into my orange yet, and you're starting to see some shading. And I'm also letting it do it itself. Like here, I just kind of put a bunch of paint and then I lightened it up. So I've got like a really dark side of my petal here. I've got a light area and I've got a little dark. I didn't really do that on purpose. It just happened. So let your paper kind of do what it do what it wants to do. That's why I'm saying experiment with the amount of water you have, the amount of paint you have. Also, by going outside of the lines or inside of the lines, that's just going to give you extra added shading. That's the other good thing with when you're using the watercolor pencils. If you want to go in after everything's completely dried and then shade with the pencils, those are nice. And honestly, in regards to paint and brushes and paper, yes, you get what you pay for. You totally get what you pay for. To start out, go as cheap as you can, because you want to make mistakes when you're painting, when you're first starting out, because that's the only way you're going to learn. And the happy mistakes turn into some really cool things and saying, oh, I like this technique, I'm going to keep doing that. When you really kind of get a feel for what you're doing, then put the money into it and get the better paper or the best that you can get. Some people always say, no matter what, paint with the best brushes and the best paint you can afford. I still say not until you're really ready, experiment. And different brands are different. Hobby Lobby brand is different than Michael's brand, is different than Joanne Fabric's brand, is different than anything that you can get on Amazon brand. Everybody kind of has their own brand, but they're all kind of basic too. So like I said, when you're just starting, go to Dollar Tree or Five Below. And Dollar Tree right now does have individual little paint palettes of watercolor paint, which is pretty cool. So get yourself some. You can use watercolor paint on regular paper, but you're not going to get the same results. Watercolor paper is specifically made to absorb the water, to be able to give you the different depths and the different shadings, whereas like copy paper, yeah, you can paint on copy paper, but you're not going to get the same effects. When I paint, not so much with watercolor paint, because a little bit goes a really long way, so you're not using as much, but especially when I'm using acrylic paint. My trick is always have a piece of scrap paper with you, like copy paper, printer paper works great, mixed media paper. Always have a little bit of that on hand. Before you rinse your brush in the water, take your brush, just dab it all off on the extra piece of paper. Do that every time. Take as much of the paint out as you can. Then rinse your brush. You do save the environment because you don't have all the plastics going down the drain. But B, what's fantastic is if you do any type of collage work or journal work, or even doodling, or even more painting, you make fantastic background papers just by doing your colors. So like I'll even have multiple colors. If I'm doing blues and greens, I usually put them together. If I do oranges and yellows, I'll put those together on a scrap paper. You can come up with some absolutely fantastic colors on your paper. You can then tear that paper to make collages, to make journals, fold it for origami. It just, tons of, when you're a crafter, you never know, especially with Pinterest, you never know what you're going to see. You never know what you're going to want to make next. So it's a great way to just kind of get a little extra. When we do painting classes with the acrylics, I always have everybody have a piece of paper down. And then if they don't want to keep it, I take it, and you just get some really great, the fun thing to do then too is, going back to that black Sharpie. Once you've drawn, you've just basically wiped your brush off on all of those pieces of paper, then you can do some great doodles over with a Sharpie.
you make earrings from a class that we did? About your paint?
Oh, definitely. The question was, you know, can you make earrings or any other kind of jewelry out of that? That's a great way to make paper for that. And what you can do a couple different things with that. You can, you know, just do all sorts of blobs and get your colors if you want kind of like an abstract type of picture. And then what's great to use is Mod Podge and cover it with Mod Podge. It'll make it stiff and it'll protect it. If you don't want to purchase Mod Podge, which is a name brand, it's basically technically three parts water, 1 part glue. But there's really no rocket science to it. Get it, just, you know, put some glue down and then add some water to it till it gets to a consistency that you like. But, you know, clear glue it'll dry clear. And that's a great way to make it stiff. There's also a product out there called Dimensional Magic. And what it does is it's like a fake resin. Because resin is very hot right now. Everybody's making resin jewelry. And that can kind of be expensive to get it because you need 2 parts of it. Usually it's a 2-part epoxy. You have your resin and then you have to get equal parts. You pour it in, you mix it together, then you pour it into a mold or pour it on top of something. And it gives you the domed effect and it gives you the clear look. The Dimension Magic also kind of gives you that same idea of doing it that way. It'll stand out, it'll protect it. So that's a fun thing to do. So yeah, with any of like the scrap paper, never throw anything out either. I mean, that's a part of being a crafter. You never know what you're gonna need. My husband is never happy with me because I say, I may need that someday. But it's amazing what you think you can find with stuff, but especially with paper. You never know, like great paper to paint on your junk mail. Open it up, you've got a great envelope. To prepare, if you want to paint on junk mail, a great product to get is called white gesso. And you can take any type of paper that comes in the mail to you, cover that with white gesso, and you've basically made your own canvas and you can paint on top of that. So that's a great way to use some of the things. So with mine, I'm just kind of playing around here. I'm going into different flowers. I'm letting some areas dry. I'm going darker on some, lighter on some. If I'm bleeding into any other areas with my paint, I'm not really caring. Because I'm really because I'm doing my light coat, it doesn't matter. So you can kind of see where I've come with this. You can see the outlines. You can see in some of the areas I've gone much darker, kind of outlined some. It looks weird the way it is right now, but the more layers you add to it. So like here, that's really dark. I probably wouldn't leave it like that, but for now, I'm not really worrying because I can always go back. That's one thing I want to show you. Everybody, if you look at this, you can see this really dark flower here, this really dark patch that I did. Say I didn't like that. Say, oh, that looks weird. I'm not happy with how dark that is. All I'm doing is I'm getting water on my brush. And look at that. Even though it's dried, I can still smooth that out. Now, the longer it dries, the longer it takes to go over it and over it and over it. But you can see, I brought it away. So I blended it more. You know, again, with watercolor paper, you have to be careful because it is a little delicate that you don't want to keep going over the area. So like if you have an area, you have a flower that you just do not like the way that looks, move on to something else, move on to another area. Because if I were to take my paintbrush and just go over and really try to blend this in, I'm going to get a hole in my paper. So you really just kind of want to say, all right, let's leave it. And then I'll see what I can do. You know, if you can't get it up with your paper towel, like I can still kind of come in here. I'm dabbing with a dry paper towel. So you can see how much more I even took off of that area. Now I want to leave that alone for a while. I don't want to instantly go back to it because I kind of you can overwork it. I don't want to overwork that area right now. I want to let it really dry, really good, kind of let the paper heal itself in some senses, go back to that one later. Move on to another area if you really have a spot that you just don't like the way it looked. So like I said, I like more so using kind of what I call this dry brush technique a little better than putting the water down first and then painting. I'm going to do that one area just so you can see. Do that with. I'm going to do that in this petal right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to paint with water. I'm going to completely, can't see it, but I've completely painted my shape with water. I'm then going to go into my paint and I'm going to just start touching. See how it moves? See how it spreads down? It wants to go wherever your water is. So I'm putting it really close to the edge, but you don't see it go, even though I'm holding it sideways, it would do that anyway. It's not going this way because I don't have any water on this side. I just have water in the petal shape, so you can see it going down. So that's kind of an interesting look too, when you're letting it go more organically and letting the water go, even if it's really going down because I'm holding it up. But if I was just still holding this flat, if I touch my paint where there's water, it's going to still travel, which again shows you why you don't want to paint with the whole thing all wet, because then everything would mix into everything. But that gives a really neat look. That's fun too, especially for skies and clouds. If you want to give the feeling of motion, especially with a cloud.
Yeah, I have a hard time drawing clouds and making it look like clouds.
If you think of when you're doing clouds, think of doing the background, but not the cloud. Imagine where your cloud is going to be, paint around it, but don't paint into the cloud. Leave some areas completely white, then kind of go in with a little bit of gray, a little bit of blue, because if you look up at the clouds are very wispy most of the times, or the ones that we always like, oh, look at that cloud. It's a nice wispy cloud, but you can always see a little bit of sky through it, or parts of it are are dark gray. So again, you want to think of layers with that. Also kind of the more, you know, the more you shadow something, the more impressive it will look. And, you know, you may not have tried to do it, but you're like, whoa, look at that. When you didn't really try, it just kind of went that way. Like looking back at some of mine, I like some of the shadings that it did, and I didn't try to do it. It just went that way because I didn't blend it in. So the more you do, and I'm, like I said, I'm going for more of an abstract idea of a flower. I don't want to draw a picture. One of the teachers I've taken classes with, shout out to Steve Dupree, who has come and done classes here at the library. One of the best comments that he made was, you're painting a picture. You're not taking a photograph. So if you want it to look exactly like it looks, take a photograph, and then it will look exactly like it is. If you want your own idea of what it is, then paint a picture and don't try to be perfect. And I really like that because in my mind, I'm very much attracted to the realistic paintings. So, you know, I really like it to look like it's supposed to look, unless it's an abstract. But it bothered me when I couldn't get to those kinds of looks until he said that. And I'm like, well, you're right. You know, if I really want it to be perfect, I'm going to draw. I mean, I'm going to just take a picture. So for my painting here, what I've done is I've gone all around. I've done all the petals first. I didn't worry about what else was there. Because if I were to go in on some of these and try to do my sky, just as you saw the drippiness of the one petal that I did, that's what would happen. Your yellow is going to mix in with your blue. So whenever you go to a different section, you have to remember, you definitely want it dry in that area. And the other good thing to remember too is, you know, when you are painting, always have one part of your water be for rinsing and one with watercolor, and then one for dipping in. Because if you have muddy water that you've rinsed your paintbrush in, then that color is not going to be the same. You're going to bring that muddy water, muddy color onto your picture. Except with what, especially being here outside painting, you know, our brushes are drying out very quickly. You can make your paint go along, you know, a long way too. Like I just put some paint in this area and I was like, well, that's way too dark. So I can just keep spreading it out. It goes a long way. And the nice thing, especially with the palettes, which is what the little plastic thing is called, with those being so cheap, I got these at the Dollar Tree. The nice thing with that is you can buy multiple ones. So if you're painting with watercolor paints, you're just going to leave those paints on there. You can cover it with plastic wrap to protect a little bit, but either way, it's going to dry. But the joy of watercolor paint is it reactivates with water. Acrylics, once it's dry, it's dry. Then you're done. You can reactivate it a little bit, but not 100%. But with watercolor, you know, I've left watercolors in a tray for, you know, over a month and have been able to reactivate them. How long you can reactivate, I'm not quite sure. Longest I've gone is a month. You know, I'm doing just, you know, yellow for my leaves right now. When you want to start playing with another color, grab a little bit of the orange, kind of do some orange around the center. Those are some of the sunflowers that I've seen. Mixing watercolors is also the same. You know, put it in a little, one of the little wells, put some of the one color, put some of the other color, mix it up, add the water to it. So yeah, you can make your own colors. If you didn't particularly like this yellow, or you want to try to experiment with another color, add a little bit of orange to it, see what color that gives you. But I think to be happiest with watercolor is just remember that it's a very loose medium. You're not having it look exactly like what you're seeing. A little more free, little more kind of dreamy. I've always thought watercolors gave like a dreamy effect. And the more you practice with it, the better you'll become. It's definitely interesting. Especially with watercolors, I prefer to paint flat, not up on an easel, but I'm trying to hold this up if people want to like look at it as I'm doing it. So it's very interesting. It's not necessarily turning out the way that I would have wanted it to turn out because of the way some of it's dripping, the way some of it's drying before I can get to it. But it's all good. Like I said, you can have a plan, but just go with it because it can be different. That's very interesting painting outside. The wind. I'm really making this a nature painting because there's some bugs that have decided to join my painting and have been now painted in. So my picture has a little bit of protein.
I've never painted outside before. I never have. Have you ever painted outside before?
I don't do a lot of painting outside. I'll be honest, I am not a big outdoor girl, except at the beach. I love the beach. I could be at the beach all day, all the time, all day long. So yes, I have painted at the beach. That's fun, especially when the wind suddenly picks up and your watercolors and your paper go into the sand. Yes. What a realistic touch that beach scene was. There's actual pieces of South Carolina sand in one of my pictures. But yeah, that's whenever you hear of plein air painting, and it's PLEIN air, that's what that is. It's basically being outside, painting what you see. I'm very lucky. I have a screened-in porch, a back deck. So technically I'm outside, but with the joys of not having the bugs. I kind of have a good base here with with most of my leaves. They're all pretty much in there, a very light coat. Just for fun, because I'm getting tired of yellow, I'm gonna dip into my orange just to kind of give some ideas. I kind of like the orange coming from the centers, coming off of the stem in the middle. So I'm just bringing in a little bit of that color. And I'm just kind of flicking it in there. You can kind of see the subtle. It's a little bit in there. It's just kind of giving you another dimension with the orange. You don't need to use it. But if you want, I'm just doing, you know, a couple little streaks in there. I am amazed at the amount of different kinds of sunflowers there are. Different colors, different petal shapes. So, you know, truly you can't make a mistake when you're painting them, because you can just say, well, this is just a different variety than what you see in your local florist shop. So that you can see, it's a little, you can see the shadowing that I just did with the orange. I just kind of brought it into the center, just brought it up a little bit. So it gives you a very subtle color, which I liked. Again, not necessarily realistic, but I like the color. So that's what I did with the orange, just dabbed it. Dabbed it around. Let it go where it wants to go. Especially holding up, you get some really cool drips. And then again, if I want to like outline, I can just take my brush more in the dry paint, bring it in. If I want to cover up some of those pencil lines, like I said, I personally, I kind of like the pencil lines showing. I don't mind that at all. And with watercolors, it does dry lighter. So, you know, you can sometimes hear artists saying, well, I'm never really done with the painting. I just had to stop. So you can, you know, look at it multiple times and you may never be happy with it, but your watercolor will dry lighter. So that's why even when you think you're done, you know, you may look at this tomorrow and you think, oh, you know, I wanted that to be a little bit darker. You could also take, if you don't have watercolor pencils, if you had just even regular colored pencils, you can draw on top of watercolor. Markers look cool. I'm just, what I kind of, I did this and I kind of like the way it looked. Here's another little bit of a look. My paintbrush wasn't completely pointed at the tip, and I was just kind of sprinkling on like this, and I was making like extra little marks there, and I kind of like that. So it's not a perfect flower. It's going a little bit more into the abstract part of it where I'm going outline. A lot of people will do that too with the markers. If you go over your, what I really love is when people put like blobs of color and then take a black Sharpie and then draw over that. And if you've got a perfect circle, you don't draw a perfect circle around it, you draw around the area. So that kind of gives a cool, if you're going a little bit outside your box here, that just kind of gives a neat little abstracty kind of a look. That's what I'm saying, you know, never worry about making a mistake. And you know what I could do too is say I'm like, all right, this is enough. I'm done. This is all I want to do. Go back to it tomorrow. Go back to it tomorrow and then see what it looks like. And like I said, like dabbing away, like that was really dark and I didn't like it. So I just took my paper towel. I dabbed around it. But again, once you dab, you don't want to go back and work on a part that you just did. You definitely want to like leave this area alone now, go over here somewhere and work on that area because you can basically erase your paper. So you don't want to get a hole. So that kind of gives you an idea of a little bit of the shadings in there, the little colors that way. If I'm going to do some leaves. So I'm going to get my little dots, get my whole big dot of water, touch some of that color in there, bring that in. I think I'm going to do just a big leaf. I'm going to just freehand it. I want it coming, hard to do upside down, but I want it coming off the paper. And this is again more dry brush. I don't want a wet brush in this area because if I did wet with the paper, then that would all blend in together. And again, I find it safer, do a very light color first, then fill in with the dark. And it all smooths out. You don't think you have enough paint there, but if you go over it a little bit more. But I really like the idea of, you know, putting your strip of masking tape or painter's tape is the best, around the area, drawing, painting inside of that, going onto the painter's tape as you're painting. Because then if I had a strip right there and I pulled that off, that would be a whole beautiful white border, but then it would look like my leaf because your eyes would see it continuing off. This kind of looks like it's continuing off, but I didn't do it wide enough to really make it look like, okay, your tip is coming over to here. But with the technique of using the painter's tape, that's really cool. So that's kind of how it's shaping up. And again, very light, and then go back and do darker in your area. You know, I've shown in mine, in the original, I did a blue background and I made sure everything was completely dry before I put that background in. So that's why you really, when you're painting, it's a good idea to paint in stages with watercolor, because it definitely, like if I were to try to paint blue up here, I might have it really be bleeding into it, which is okay, You know, it's an okay thing to have it bleed in. But if you don't want that look, if you wanted a pure green, it wouldn't do it. Watercolor you'll find too, if you notice, you're not seeing a lot of your brush strokes. Acrylics, you're really going to see the brush stroke that you make, and it gives it a different look. With your watercolor, you know, you put it on there, it blends in. It fades itself away. You know, if I really want, you know, some dark lines, I've got to really just dry brush that in. I can't just gently put it in. It has to be dry brushed. And even then that line that I just painted for the green leaf, it looks really dark. That's going to fade. By the time it truly dries, it's really going to fade. So that's truly why I've said it really does need to be in layers. Very interesting, because I think I feel a sprinkle. The joys, unless it was just one of the leaves wet up here. Just one. So if it does start to rain when you're painting, you want to keep that dry. you want to put your paint away and you want to have it dry. Again, the other I did want to show for my folks here, I forgot to put brown on your palette, so I will come around and give you a little bit of brown for the centers. And again, you only need a tiny drop. Like that's about all. Just kind of dab it just a little bit like that. So what I wanted to do is I want to show you, like I drew all my little circles in the pencil. So obviously what I want to do is I don't want to come in thick with paint. I want just a little bit of paint. But you can see what a neat, you can see the little circles, how it gives, kind of how it gives, I don't know if you can see it from where you're sitting, but it does give that little added dimension of drawing the little circles in there. I'm also going to show you with this one, I'm going to just draw. I'm just going to paint my circle here. And then again with shading, you can get the same look by just kind of dropping little dots onto so with this one, you can see how there are some darker areas and some lighter areas, which still kind of gives you the idea of seeds, the ideas of the little dots. This one actually has the dots drawn in, or you can take your paintbrush and literally just go through and draw tiny little dots. And fill that in. If you're going to do the tiny little dots, I would suggest painting a very light base color of brown so the white doesn't show through. This definitely takes you a lot longer. Gives it a different look. I'm going to smudge it a bit more. I think I definitely like I definitely like the idea of having a light colored, I'm gonna switch midstream here. I definitely like having a light colored background. And then I'm gonna go through and do those dots. And I can switch that midstream because all I needed to do was add water. And you can see I can almost erase what I have here, filling in where I want it to go in. And then if I even want that to be more faded, I can just, I have to do this sideways down here. I can just add more water on top of this and then take my paper towel, which I do not know what oh, there it is. Keep losing my paper towel. And then I'm gonna just dab a bit. So I want, for that one look of the dots that I was trying to show you, I definitely want a light background first. Then, let's see this, I have way too much water on my brush. Want to do dots. Very dry brush. Dip it into the paint. And then little dips. That way you've got the background. You've got the background of your paint. See, I'm just doing little bitty dots. To give the illusion of, hey, these are full of seeds. So this basically shows you 3 different ways to do your little dots if you want to have dots in the middles of your sunflowers. And you decide kind of doing a I did a combination of dots on the top one where I drew the little circles. I still went in and did a little bit of dots after it dried. This is all a light background and straight dots. It's smeared down because I held it up, but I just kind of put little dots that way. This one is, you're going to do it in layers. So you get different pools of light and darks. So once it dries, you go back in, you add another layer. You can also get darker if, as you're painting on there, you can see the water and the paint will pool in certain areas. That's also good for shading. So a couple different ways to do that. Again, a watercolor painting, you can take as much time as you want to do it. Go back, set it down for a while, go back, see what it needs, see how the color has faded, add to it if you want. Reactivate a little bit if you want. But just try to remember to be loose, more ethereal with your color, because where you see the color pooling up in certain areas, that gives it a lot more interest than trying to be really specific. So for me, other than having to put in a couple more leaves and then doing the blue, I'm going to do blue because I think the blue and the yellow pop, doing a little bit of a background, you're pretty much done. You know, you just kind of keep going over what you want to go over. Color wheel wise, you know, you kind of look at your colors to see what your background wants to be. You know, blue and yellow really go well together. You always, if you don't invest in a color wheel, just look outside, see what colors look good together. See what you're drawn to when you're wearing it. You know, nothing's wrong. You're never wrong with anything you want to put together, because if it pleases you, it's right. But look at your flowers, see what colors they have in them. Use that as your color palette. I knit as well, and a lot of times for sweater patterns, they'll actually have a color. They'll take a picture of a landscape, they'll show that picture, and then they'll pull out the colors that they see in there, and that's what they're going to give you as your stripes or dots or whatever pattern you're making with it, which is kind of neat. So it's the same kind of thing. Take a picture, squint when you're looking at the different colors out there. When you're gonna, you know, even looking at an actual flower, squint your eyes so it's a little blurry. Let your eyes kind of go out of focus, and then see what colors that you see. And what you think you're seeing full on as you're looking at it may be a little different when you squint, and that's how you can get your shading and your variations. So for the Zoom part of it, we're done. That's about as far as I'm going to go with it. You get to, you know, continue on and play with that. Hopefully it wasn't so far away where it was not able to be seen, but I know I talked enough to hopefully have you be able to draw along with us. If you are doing this, this video will be on the website always of Southeast Steuben County Library. Go back in, look at it. And if you do write comments, I'll be happy to answer any questions. I go back and look at the videos that we've put on there. And if anybody has questions, I do go back and try to answer them. And if you've painted it, please add a picture of your work. We'd love to see what you do. So, you know, thank you very much to the library for, you know, sponsoring artists such as myself to be able to come and do some fun classes with everybody. Thank you to everybody who attended here. Thank you to everybody who's going to attend in cyberspace. Our next project, actually on Tuesday, is going to be this birdhouse, like that. It's going to be a little birdhouse. You can paint it any way you want. We've got little embellishments to add on to it. That's on Tuesday. And we're going to have a video as well. So thank you so much. That's it for Crafting with Kimberly.